I'm Jim Mather. I'm the technical director for the ARM facility. And today we're going to provide an overview of the ARM mobile facilities and the process that we use to solicit proposals for the deployment of those facilities. We've got a call for proposals with the preliminary letters due on April 5th. And so we thought this would be a good opportunity to invite folks to learn about the process a little bit, ask questions. There's a lot involved, and so we want to have an opportunity to discuss this with the community. Just a couple of business points before we get started. All familiar, I'm sure, but we've got a few people here, so if you're not speaking, please do use the stay on mute. If you have questions along the way, and I do expect that we'll have plenty of time for questions. We try to program this for about maybe take half the time for material, and then we want to allow a lot of time for discussion. But if you do have questions along the way, raise your hand and we'll try to catch those at the time, or you can use the chat, of course. So with that, I think I will go ahead and share my slides. What I'm going to do is start with a high-level introduction to the ARM facility, and just take a few minutes to do that. And then I will, see if I can get this organized. And then I'll hand it off to Heath Powers. Heath is the manager for the first and second mobile facilities. And one of those will be the object of this current call. So he'll provide an overview of the mobile facilities. And then Nikki Hickman will wrap it up. Nikki is the Associate Director for Operations, and she's also in charge of the open facility process, and apparently I am on automatic advance. So Nikki will be talking about the process for the proposal call. So with that, here's a one-slide introduction to the scope of the ARM facility. We've been providing measurements to the research community now for 30 years. It'll be 30 years this May. We do that through a network of ground-based observatories. A little bit more about that on the next slide. And that is the main focus of the facility, these ground-based observatories. But additionally, we augment those measurements on an episodic basis with aerial platforms, both piloted and uncrewed. We have an extensive set of data products that emerge from these and management infrastructure to process those data to standard form. Over the last 5 or 6 years or so, we've additionally begun to augment these measurements with large data simulations, beginning with our Southern Great Plains site in Oklahoma. And we will be expanding that, look at deep convection soon. And then finally, we provide support for field campaigns at these various observatories, including the deployment of the mobile facilities, and that's really the main object of this call today. So a little bit on the scope of these ground-based observatories. Along the left here show the kinds of measurements that we provide at each of the observatories. Each observatory has about 50 separate instruments providing measurements of the background atmospheric state at the surface and in profile, the surface energy balance, radiation and heat fluxes, aerosol and hydrometeor profiles using passive and active remote sensors, near surface aerosol properties using in situ measurements. And then again, we provide aerial measurements to support these on a proposal-driven episodic basis. On the right here, you see a map of where ARM deployments have been. I'm sorry about that. So these solid blue circles indicate the locations of our long-term fixed sites. So these are decade or longer deployments in Southern Great Plains in Oklahoma, up at the North Slope of Alaska, and in the Azores. We had a few former sites, long-term sites out in the tropical Pacific. The rest of these, or most of the rest of these, represent mobile facility deployments, which are typically about a year in duration, and again is the focus of this current call. I do want to briefly mention the aerial capabilities, although these are the fixed wing capabilities are not part of this call. For a long time, about a decade, we operated a Gulfstream turboprop aircraft that has been retired. We're currently in the process of preparing a Bombardier Challenger 850 to be the new ARM research aircraft. We expect that to be ready in late 2023. And when that timeline becomes clearer, there'll be a call for proposals for that capability as well. We're also preparing a uncrewed aerial system called the Arctic Shark, which has got a payload capacity of about 100 pounds. Expect to do some test flights of that Southern Great Plains this summer, and that will also be made available for proposals. We are flying a tethered balloon system. We've flown this now in the Arctic, at the Southern Great Plains, and in the Colorado. We'll be flying it in Houston this summer, and we are inviting people to propose to use the tethered balloon as part of mobile facility deployments. The feasibility of that will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. And then I noted that there's extensive data management infrastructure across these various observatories. We operate about 450 individual instruments that generate about 2,500 active data streams at any given time. And today we've accumulated over 3 petabytes of data. With all of these data streams, diverse data streams and the large volume, there's a critical need for an efficient system for getting users connected up with the right data streams. And so we have developed a system that we call data discovery that has evolved over time. Got a snapshot of that here on the left that provides information about recommendations for particular parameters, you can dig down into more information about those, and you can find a lot more information about this system on the data tab. Additionally, although most of our users are downloading data to use in their own workstations, some of our data streams, particular Doppler spectra, or some of the model simulations are quite large. And so we have provided the computational capabilities at the data center in Oak Ridge to do high-level processing on our high-performance computing system. And that is available for processing of ARM data, again, on a proposal-driven basis. So you can find out more about that on the data tab. So just wrap up my part here by noting that there's a lot of opportunities to get more information, lots of information on arm.gov, on the capabilities of these various locations, as well as on the process, and Nikki will say more about that a little bit. That information is available under the research tab. If you're not finding what you want, at the bottom of every web page, in the footer, there's an Ask Us button that will get your question into a queue. So I encourage you to make use of that. You can also reach out to specific individuals by looking for particular roles under our organization tab. And we've also just implemented a new button on the right of every page for feedback, which you can also use for questions, although I'd encourage you to use Ask Us for that. So maybe I will stop sharing now, see if there's any quick questions for me before we hand it off to Heath, as he's going to dig into the capabilities of the mobile facilities a bit more detail. Any quick questions for me? Hearing none, I will take it away, Heath.
Can you switch screens, Heath? It's showing your presentation now.
I am.
Yep, perfect.
Just finding the button on this platform. We're teams here at Los Alamos now, so to learn another one. So I'm Heath Powers, and from Los Alamos National Laboratory, and I'm just here to give you a little bit of an overview on our mobile observatories. So first of all, why do we have these? The mobile observatories came after ARM established some fixed sites where we make long-term observations of the atmosphere from a single location, and realized the value of that could be increased by taking that measurement capability and moving it to other places to measure a broader range of geographic locations. We call these things, you'll hear me say AMF, these are ARM mobile facilities. That just means a mobile atmospheric observatory for this. So ARM has 3 of these mobile observatories, AMF 1, 2, and 3. I'll let you guess which one came first here. AMF 1 was really designed to take that measurement capability, that observational capacity from one of the fixed sites and move that somewhere else in the world. You can see from the picture here that the facility is integrated into shipping containers, which is the most efficient way to move these facilities around. So we place the facilities onto cargo ships and get them to the places that we need. about 5 years after the AMF1 was developed, the AMF2 was created. This facility is intended to be deployed aboard ships, or it can be deployed aboard ships, and that really increased the ability to get observations from undersampled places. The surfaces of the ocean have very few of these sophisticated observations that we deliver, so the AMF2 brings that capability. And then lastly, the AMF3, I think, came in 2013, and it came with the idea to have sort of longer term studies, but still on a mobile platform. The AMF1 and AMF2 make deployments of several months to a year, sometimes a little more than that, but pretty short term. The AMF3 is targeted for more medium-term, multi-year studies. This facility has been in Alaska for the last 8 years on the North Slope in Arctic Alaska, and it's in the process of being moved for another study in the southeastern US of a similar length. So what do these facilities bring? Very similar observational capability as the fixed sites. I won't go through all the instruments in detail. We'll make these slides available, but in general, a typical deployment for one of these AMFs will bring some atmospheric state and radiation instruments. So that's surface meteorology, that's broadband and spectral radiation, up and down welling. It's liquid water path, column water vapor. It's wind profiles, that sort of thing. We also focus on clouds and precipitation. That's done with ground-based precipitation gauges, as well as some remote sensing instruments. We have a zenith pointing radar for cloud studies, and several LiDARs for looking at the boundary layer. There's also a couple of instruments that are sort of special request by ARM. These are more sophisticated instruments and require bigger investment for us to support, but they're certainly available if the study warrants their use. This is a scanning cloud radar that's either a Ka band coupled with either an X or a W, and also there's a high spectral resolution LiDAR available. Then lastly, we put a lot of emphasis on aerosol measurements. So we look at aerosol concentration, size, the chemistry, CCN, as well as a number of trace gases. And there too also are some additional instruments, depending on a study, that can be requested from ARM. So with that overview, where have these mobile facilities been? That's, the real motivation for these is to get a wide geographic set of measurements. And of the 3 mobile facilities, ARM has made observations on all 7 continents, been to a number of countries, and had measured on 4 different ships on the ocean. So really broad area where we make measurements with these facilities. And then lastly, let's talk about what it is that you get whenever you are awarded the use of one of these facilities. And there's a lot that goes into it, but in a nutshell, it's really end-to-end data collection and data delivery from these mobile campaigns. It's from the initial planning and logistics to finding a place to deploy the facility, to actually operating the facility, their staff on the ground looking after the instruments. They're supported by a large number of people remotely to ensure that we have good data quality, high data availability, and timely delivery of the data. So yeah, in a nutshell, it's sort of the whole gamut. You get the data accessible to you and the scientific community. We also try and leverage high impact science from what we do by supporting intensive operations periods with with these deployments, as well as guest instruments. We make some value-added products to help increase the impactfulness of the observations that we collect. And I think that's all I have. Just let me make sure. Oops, sorry about that. And with that, so that's an overview of what these facilities are and what you get. How do you get these facilities is the next part of this. I'll turn this over to Nikki Hickman. She is our ARMS Associate Director of Operations, and she's going to describe the process of how to propose the use of these facilities.
If you'll stop sharing, I'll share, and if anyone has any quick questions for Heath. I think I'll make one point that I didn't think about necessarily putting into the presentation, and that we are different from other deployment observatories and such that there's no data embargo. Our data goes into our archive and is available to users as soon as it is processed. So just be aware of that. We're going to run through just quickly, hopefully what you're aware of, but if you're not, what we want you to be aware of. So in order to propose to ARM, you need to have an account. So if you go to any of our ARM web pages, and like Jim said, scroll to the bottom, there's a create account link on the left. If you aren't sure if you have one or not, go ahead and click this one and put your email address in. And if you have one, it'll show up like this, and you can click the update your account. And this is also how you can get information from ARM through our Atmospheric Observer, which is a monthly release, the ASR newsletter, which is also a monthly release, and you can get information about ASR working groups. That's once you click in there, you can manage your subscriptions. We have other reference information at the bottom here, particularly if you're somewhat new to ARM. Acronyms can be a nightmare. So please click the acronym list, the glossary, check that out. Look at our outreach, look at our how to use ARM facilities. That's a link down there. And as everything else, submit a proposal. You can actually get to the page from there. And I would always say, we beg you to ask. We put ask us on every web page. We have it in our data discovery at the top. We don't want you to assume anything or be frustrated. So just please ask us. I'm going to kind of pick up where Jim had a slide there. If you look at the research tab on our website and click campaigns, this will take you to the main page of interest to what we're talking about here. At the top of that page, we have information about the open calls. The TBS call, I took this before it was closed. It was on there, but the annual facility call. And if you click the link from here, it'll take you to the specific request. And this is going to tell you what's available to request. As Heath was saying, we have an AMF available. It can be requested for as early as December 23 as a domestic deployment, or April 24 for an international deployment. The instruments will be similar, but not the same as SAIL. So please understand that. And we will not be including the HSRL or the scanning radars for this deployment. If you are interested in the TBS, you do need to justify and explain to us in there how it's going to meet the science goals. We also have the ability for you to propose a supplemental campaign or a level 4 campaign that is to augment an ARM observatory. So if you want to augment or do a large campaign at, say, the Southern Great Plains site, this is how you would approach that. Level 4 campaigns are not always available, so we put them in the specific call. The aerial facilities are not going to be available as well for this, and so we've noted that there. So if you go to the campaign webpage, in the middle, there's a big green bar. This is kind of the high level what we want you to know. We want you to read the instructions carefully. Please go to the campaign webpage, read through it. It's pretty straightforward. There are clickable references throughout it, and I'll run you through some of those critical ones. When you submit we want you to submit a field campaign, of course. When you do, please be patient with us. We'll review them as quickly as possible to determine what level they are. We'll get back to you with requests for a full proposal, which in the annual facility call, we're expecting with around 2 weeks or so to get back to that. And then Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, we're thinking 6 to 8 weeks after that would be the submission.
That's what we're expecting, yes.
Yes. So please just keep your ears open and respond to us and help us out. And then if your proposal is approved, understand there are some requirements on you. You're going to help us conduct this field campaign. You will be highly involved with that. And then in the closeout, you do have to submit your data and your final report within 6 months. And that's a pretty hard deadline. We need to talk if there's any issues, but that's a pretty hard deadline. It's a requirement. It's not something we just do to torture you. It's how we get information out to other users about what you've done with this fill campaign and what ARM has done to support the community. So it is important that we get that information out there and we get the other data out for the users so the science can be done. So if you go down our campaign page, we do describe our level 1, 2, and 3 campaigns. These are proposals that you can submit any time of the year. What I'm showing you here is the guidelines for that. So if you want to start a campaign at a certain time, if it's a certain level, it needs to be approved 30 days for a level 1 campaign. That's typically a single guest instrument campaign at a fixed site or an AOS site. Level 2, 60 days. This is the logic that goes into our timing and when you need to propose, and it shows that the effort scales based on the cost that it costs ARM to implement the proposal. So again, the campaign website's pretty descriptive, it's instructive. We do have timelines, we have an interactive assistance with that, I'll show you in a moment. There's documented guidelines in here, please read them. They do explain lots of roles and responsibilities of what happens during the review and if something is approved, so you know what to expect. And then we also have a standardized instrument support request. We must have one of these forms for every guest instrument or we won't be able to review it. And that ISR does tell us things like what the instrument is, what it does, how big it is, how heavy it is, how much power it needs, and particularly what hazards might come with that. That's really important for us to assess before we can determine if we can actually support something. So here's the interactive proposal deadlines. You see it first in the reminder section. You can put the date in that you desire for the campaign measurements to start, and then you can use the level to determine when you need to submit your proposal. And once you click that in, it will tell you the date it's due by, and then you'll get a response from ARM saying, yes, we've received it, and it will be reviewed. The field campaign guidelines document, you can click here, and this will give you lots of information, like I said, about the roles, what to expect, what to submit. So please do read that. And on down the campaign webpage, we have a section for proposing a campaign, which again, we try to say, hey, look at these deadlines. So please look at those when you're thinking about when to submit. And then when you're ready to submit, click this. And this is a simple form. We want to know who you are, what you want to do, when you want to do it, where would you like to do it, what's the scientific focus, what's your plan, what ARM instruments do you want to utilize in this, which ones are critical, that is really important. Please let us know which ones are critical. And then also what guest instruments you'll be proposing. Each of those, again, has to have an ISR for us to review it, so be aware of that. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to the ARM Field Campaign Administrator. This is the same tool as the Ask Us button or the support button in data discovery. So any of those will go through the same process, we'll get to the same people, and we'll get to your questions and hopefully be able to help you very quickly. There's also a template for the final campaign report here. If you want to see what that entails, you can also go look at past field campaigns and look at the reports that they've submitted. They're all on their campaign our ARM campaign web pages for each of those. And then below that, we have the data and metadata submission instructions. So any data that you have associated with your guest instruments going to need to be submitted. This will tell you how to do that, what that involves. And then the acknowledging ARM box on the right, this is going to tell you how to acknowledge ARM for using the data. You can learn how to cite. There's some tools if you click that button. It also has DOI guidance for data streams. And then I put in here a reference slide for you. I would suggest anyone go to the news article that we have. It's 5 tips for a successful ARM campaign proposal. There is a very good video in there, and there's a lot of written documentation. Again, the ARM campaign webpage, look at that, go down through that, see what you can find, ask us any questions. We have campaign notebooks for the SAIL and Tracer campaigns. This is something that's new. If you want to go look at those, I think it's very useful. You've got campaign overviews, reports, plots, maintenance tools, etc. But on the far right, you have a link to the contacts. So if you want to reach out to current PIs or co-Is to ask them how it is working with ARM or such, you can look for their contact information there. And if you're looking for anything related to the field campaign proposal, ARM, you can reach out to afcadmin@arm.gov. This is our ARM Field Campaign Administration Group. So we will try to answer any questions that you send through that. The Ask Us button will also send to that same group. And then I put a link in here for the observatory specific questions. This is a link to our organization, and it will show who the observatory manager is, who the site operations manager is. So we're trying to kind of bombard you in a lot of different places with contact information and ways to ask us, but they all lead back to the same thing. So just duplications. We don't want you to have to look too far to find a way to ask us questions, and we don't want you to sit out there frustrated. So this is the end of my presentation. And I think we can open it up for general questions, or Heath or Jim, if I forgot something you think is important, please.
There's one point I wanted to make, that, and Nikki, you alluded to this, once a mobile facility is approved for deployment, it's eligible for small campaign as any site would be. But something I would like to point out, that if you're aware of scope for a mobile facility deployment, it's far preferable to identify that upfront in your original proposal than to try to tack it on later on, because the further we get down in the process, the harder it becomes to augment that campaign. So if we know about it upfront, whether it's an intensive period, guest instruments, the more you can capture in that original proposal, the better, the more likely we'll be able to accommodate that.
Yes, and additionally, when one is approved, we will immediately be telling you a good suggestion is to keep track of collaborations, potential guest instruments, all of these things. So if you started in that proposal process, it makes it that much easier. But yeah, like Jim said, let us know what you're thinking, what you think is possible. All that communication is extremely useful, and we will do everything we can to help you not waste time or help others not waste time, and also just help you work with ARM to propose things efficiently.
So with that, I would very much like to hear if anyone has any questions.
And please jump in and ask questions if you're thinking it, other people are wanting to know too, and just afraid.
Hi, so I had a question for you guys. With regards to that proposal level 1 through level 3, you had mentioned a dollar value associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
How do we get to that dollar value? I mean, how do we know how much is costing ARM for, say, deploying a TBS?
Right, so we don't expect that you will know that. If you talk to us and let us know if there is concern about that, we'll try to help you with that. Typically, if you're bringing a guest, if you would like ARM to operate a guest instrument at one of our sites, and you're not asking us to spend a lot of time working with that instrument, or you're asking for consumables, it's going to be in that level 1. If it's going to take, if you have multiple instruments, or it's going to take a lot of work, we're going to calculate how much technician time is spent working on that instrument, processing data for some of our infrastructure. Depending on what your request is, it will add on to that. A lot of times, radiosonde launching is one that surprises people. If you ask for a lot of radiosondes, that will tack up the cost quite a bit really fast. So those are the things, just think about how much time you're asking ARM technicians or infrastructure to spend on it. If there's consumables you're asking ARM to purchase, the level of effort in that fashion. And again, reach out and ask us if you have something in mind and you really have no idea, just talk to us. We'll kind of give you our best estimate on that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, plan ahead and ask. I think are the two key things. I think people are better about the planning ahead part. But just let us know what you're thinking and we can help guide.
And I think to that specific question, I think in the field guidebook or the proposal, it lists what those levels are.
Aaron, I will share my screen. There are multiple places on our website. They're also in the guidelines more specifically, but on our campaign webpage, this interactive tool has them. Trying to click on it.
Yeah, I think maybe to Raghu's question, how would I know what particular activity costs? And that's what you were getting at, Nikki. And so that's where, I think that was a good summary of give people a rule of thumb, but by all means ask, because it can be surprising what can become expensive. So and it does trigger things like external reviews as it goes out here. So the complexity, as they get more expensive, the requirements on us and therefore on you goes up as they become more expensive and more complex. Daniel?
Yes, hi. So I have a few questions. They're all very brief. So the first one is, I just want to confirm, is the HSRL is just out of the question? Like it can't be potentially viewed as like additional instrumentation that can be requested outside of the main AMF proposal?
Right, we have two. One is absolutely committed. The second is committed through, so I'm not sure that I can speak authoritatively to the status of the second system as whether it's 100% out of the question. I think the intent is that that would be deployed at our Southern Great Plains site at that time. I would say there would have to be a very strong justification for that. I don't think that there is a rock solid commitment for the second system at that time, but it is not the intent that that would become available. It is also, I would say, problematic for many deployments. It is a really research grade system. So we have tried to deploy that system in unusual deployment in locations. It's not trivial. So that is another consideration. Really prefer to operate that where we can really take care of it.
And I would say in those situations, if it's, you obviously do not make it critical to your science goals, because that's not something we can say we can commit to. But if it's going to add science, maybe note that it would be interesting to you or advantageous in a certain way if it became available.
My second question is, this is the AMF2, right? The current call for proposals. Is that correct?
Well,
Yeah.
we're leaving that a little bit ambiguous. To be honest, the two campaigns are ending about the same time. Well, not close to the same time, within a few months. But ship, I mean, to your question, I mean, I think what might be behind your question is ship deployments would be on the table.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering, I thought if it was surely going to be AMF2, that maybe there would be a preference for ship deployments. And I was wondering about that.
I would not say that there is a preference for ship deployments, and I've been discussing this with Heath recently, that really the differences between the two systems are diminishing over time as they continue to engineer those systems. So no, there's not a specific preference, and we don't have quite the same delineation as we had in the past.
Okay, and my final question is about the length of the deployment. The longer ones would surely be more expensive to arm. I'm sort of wondering how the length, if there's a preference for shorter ones, like for more of a season length scale versus a whole year.
Our preference is really for a full year. I mean, there's a lot of overhead that goes, and Keith, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's a lot of overhead that's going to be somewhat independent of the length of the deployment. So to go out there for a couple of months is really inefficient. And so that does tend to be a knock against, I mean, sometimes there have been some that have made compelling arguments for this, but we really prefer to get more out of the deployment and see the longer deployment. At the same time, we don't want it to go too long because, you know, one of our strategies here is to sample many regimes. So we have gone to a second year. Those, I think in almost all cases, with one exception, where usually they're tacked on later. But if there's a strong justification for more than a year, you can make that case. But the sweet spot is, and what we prefer is about a year.
Thank you very much.
Roger?
Hi, Jim. To follow up on Daniel's question, the implementations for the HSRL and the scanning radar, is that for 2023 or both 2023 and 2024?
Well, there's only one. Yeah, so this is one call that we're talking about. So it is for the call that's currently open. And, you know, I'd have to say that we're really becoming somewhat more conservative about thinking about deploying scanning radars in out of the way places. I mean, as you can appreciate, I'm sure that presents a number of challenges. So we're not making that available now because we're doing some other things around that time, for example, the Southeast US spinning up. I think that could be available later on, but not as part of this call.
Thanks. That was my dog, by the way, not me whining, if you heard that. And a second question just on the timing here. So so what is the time frame? Suppose I put in the initial request, and do you want a full proposal? What will the time frame for the full proposal be?
So we embarrassingly have not set that date yet, but we're looking at, again, as Nikki said, about 6 to 8 weeks from the time that you would be notified. So it'll be around the end of May, but we need to nail that date down here ASAP, probably early next week. We'll nail it.
So once you notify me, I would only have 6 to 8 weeks to put that proposal together.
That is correct.
Okay, ouch. All right, thanks.
Raj, was that everything?
So Raghu, did you have another question?
Did. So I just wanted to check if the ship time is a part of the proposal, and if we can actually add our instruments on the ship, given the proposal is accepted, or would that have to go through another kind of round of proposals for adding other instruments on the ship?
So that's what I was, so ship time is absolutely part of that. So you don't
Right.
bear any of the logistics costs for the mobile facility deployment. We take that on. I mean, if it's also part of, I mean, if it's something that we cannot afford, then that will be a logistics review that we will assess. But yeah, if there are clear, if there are guest instruments proposed as part of the main proposal, we will review that at the same time as the main proposal. And again, it's easier for us to allow for that at that time versus try to add it on later. I will say that, and this is something that Nikki alluded to, I think is a really important point, to be clear about what is critical to the science goals of your campaign. I mean, we have certainly seen cases where people say, I want everything that you can provide. And if that's what you want, if that's what's critical, that's what will be reviewed upon. And if we can't do that, then that will be a problem. So, but on the other hand, if you can achieve your science goals with this set, and these other things would add these capabilities, making that clear makes it much easier to review, so we can understand and could save the proposal.
Yeah, I would like to add one thing to that. If you're proposing to someone like NOAA that might cover the ship costs in that proposal, there's a funding box that says, we are seeking other funding for these things. So if you're seeking funding from another agency to cover that, please note it there and anything you know about the timeline of that. So you really just want to communicate to us, are you expecting ARM to cover that? Are you proposing elsewhere to cover that? And then please do list all the guest instruments that you know about up front, particularly for ship deployments. That, like Jim said, it's much better to have them reviewed all at that point than try to add them on later.
Right. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. That was actually the question. Was we're planning to have NOAA involved, and they might have a ship, and I was just kind of not sure how to go about that. But thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks for
if
that
you'll
information.
communicate any of those collaborations with other agencies, and if you're planning on doing something, or if you're thinking ARM will do something, that's really, make that as clear as possible.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Ismail, we have a follow-on question to the ship based in the chat. So Ismail, if you'll give us a second, maybe we'll stay on that thread.
Yes. So I'll take that one. What's the typical length of a ship-based deployment, and what class of vessels do you typically use? So we do not have a typical length. We've done things on NOAA vessels that were on the order of a month to 2 months, and we've done things that were on commercial vessels that lasted over a year. So we are very creative about how we collaborate with other groups. So whether it's a chartered vessel or whether it is an interagency collaboration type thing, that sort of thing, we don't have any restrictions. We do need room for our equipment. So if you have something in mind, I would say that's a good thing to really reach out to us and talk to us about. Reach out to Heath, particularly on if you think you have a specific vessel in mind, or would we be able to fit on this or not fit on that? That's a pretty specific question, but I would not rule anything out particularly.
Ismail, your turn.
Yeah, NOAA has the instrumented site at Barrow, Alaska. And do you have any relationship with NOAA instrumentation in the Barrow? If we write a proposal, we have to connect them to, or your relationship with NOAA?
Yeah, we have good collaboration with them, but we're completely separate administratively. So if you wanted some support from the folks at the Baseline Observatory there, you would have to ask them separately. I would note that we've just had a joint proposal with our sister facility, EMSL in DOE. We've got that set up. We have nothing like that set up with NOAA.
I would say we do have some, if you request a guest instrument to be deployed at our North Slope of Alaska facility that requires collaboration, please talk to us. It does not necessarily mean you have to propose to both, but it does not necessarily mean you don't need to propose. So just talk to us about what that specific would mean, and we'll guide you.
Yeah, I think that's a better way to put it. We do deploy some instruments there and hope to do more of that. And it's possible that we could do more of that, but definitely it would be a case where you'd want to talk to us, and you might have to do something separate with the NOAA.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, appreciate the questions. These are good.
I'll just mention one thing too for those of you who are asking questions about potential ship-based proposals. I guess in your proposal, the more that you've thought about this, the more legwork, to a degree that you've done, the better. Kind of to Nikki's point of if you've already, thought about the ship is available and have a good idea if a certain subset of the facility can fit onto the ship, that's really helpful for us here versus saying, hey, we'd like you guys to go put this on the NOAA ship, and we haven't talked to them at all. It really helps us evaluate those for feasibility.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, if you haven't done any of that homework, the odds of fitting in the timeline that we've talked about is probably not there. It would probably be a longer timeline to make that work. Just looking back at the ones we've done, we have had a lot of that work done up front. Those are more complex. I think the collaborations we've had have been great, but they definitely take some time.
They do, and I would say that fits to every proposal. I mean, these larger ones that we're talking about here for the annual facility call, anything involving an AMF, please understand there's a lot of work that has to be done before we sit down, and sometimes that includes things that are, NEPA, Environmental Protection Act. When we process those, depending on where we're sitting down, those things can take more than a year. So the more we know up front when we start, once something is approved, the better off we all are, and the quicker we can nail down details, whether it is a ship or off a ship. Ship, as Jen said, even more complex, but yes, anything that you've got up front is very helpful.
Something else I guess I'd like to highlight that we've started doing the last, 3 or so deployments is very shortly after proposal is awarded, we'll organize a briefing, and Heath will go through a lot more detail on the facility and what our thinking is around the deployments, and we'll be looking to the PI to give a briefing on the science goals and really try to get everybody on the same page for the expectations. So I think that's been really helpful these last few deployments to get everybody what they want, and there's no surprises.
I agree. I think Rolanda put a question here. How do I get involved with an existing campaign? So if we have a large campaign that's out there, you can talk with the PI about what's already going on. They're usually the most knowledgeable about all the different pieces and aspects that are going on. If you have a guest instrument you want to propose, you could propose that at any time to us. If that's that level 1 likely, that could be a campaign. Now, also that can happen at fixed sites. So there's multiple ways to get involved in that fashion. The data as it flows is available in the archive. So you can immediately grab data from those campaign sites and start analyzing it and looking at it and, you know, involving and collaborating with the people that are those PIs and COIs and others interested. So I would say take a look at the campaign notebooks and see who the PIs and COIs are if you're looking at the data, and see what collaborations you might seek out there. And the campaign web pages. Sorry, there's a lot of information on each campaign web page. I take that for granted. I'm sorry, I do. It's very good.
I guess one other thing I'll mention too, just regarding the current facility call that's out right now. I can't remember the date that that the facility is available exactly at sometime in 23.
December 23 for domestic.
For that, so that should just be clear that that's sort of a best case scenario. If we're able to move the facility and accommodate a December 23 for measurement start time, that we certainly will. If they're more complex deployments overseas, on the seas and things, those probably add time to our ability to deliver on that date there. So that's, you're not committed to having to start it in December of 23. That's sort of the earliest it's available in a logistically not very challenging transition.
That is a good point. So in your proposal, please do indicate to us if you have hard dates or if you're flexible on those dates. If you're looking for seasonality, what you're looking for the length of time. Can we shift those dates a little bit, a lot? That's useful information. Beckett?
Sorry, I just had one last question, keeps coming in. So with regards to the ship-based deployments, would ARM be looking into all the logistics with regards to, say, getting permits from FAA for, say, balloon launches, or would that fall on, say, for example, the PIs? Because I know that's one of the kind of limiting factors sometimes on a lot of these deployments.
Any ARM instrument won't fall on the PIs to worry about that. Any of ARM's instruments, we will handle that. Occasionally, if we're on a vessel like a NOAA vessel, they already have certain approvals that we can leverage, or they can operate that particular instrument and we don't operate ours. But ARM will handle all of our licensing and waivers and that sort of thing for the ARM instruments. Now, if there's a guest instrument that you want to bring and you've requested, we will specifically discuss with you how that would be handled, depending on what it is.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yolanda raised a question on the side here that I think is a good one to raise about funding. So as we've talked about a number of times here, we provide the resources necessary for the deployment, for the processing of the data and all of those things. One thing that we do not do is provide funding for the research that you will be doing with the data that we provide. And that, I think probably many of you are familiar with that, but some of you may not be. So I think that's a good point to clarify. The way a user facility works in general within DOE, and this is true of ARM as well, is that we provide the measurements, but the expectation is that somebody is coming from a funded research activity and they have the resources to actually use the data once we've collected it. So, what we provide is the data, the deployment, and you will provide the research. That's what you bring to the table. And I should introduce Rolanda Juntier, whose picture is appearing. She's our public information officer. And if you are a PI, you'll get to know Rolanda well as she helps with the outreach associated with the campaign. Because that's one of the things that we want to do is make sure that not just the PI team, but the whole community is aware of what's going on, and so she'll help with that.
Thanks, John.
Seven minutes left. I would, if no one has other questions, I would like to just remind you, please look at the campaign website. There is a ton of information. It doesn't look like it, but there really is. And reach out to us. Ask us if you have any concerns, any questions, you're not sure how to proceed, you want to know if something's a deal breaker. We will be honest with you whether it's a deal breaker or whether we don't know if it is, and it needs to be proposed to find out. Things like that. We are a user facility. We are here to work with users in the scientific community, and we do want to be as efficient and helpful as we can in doing that. So please reach out to us and propose great science. We get very excited when you submit your proposals.
One last question. Do you allow guest instruments on the tether balloon system?
We do. Yep, and those can be, so we've gone through a more formal process for the deployment of the tether balloons themselves. And we refer to these 2-week deployments as tether balloon missions. We've, I think, just closed pre-proposals for the current set. So one can propose guest instruments as part of the proposal for the tether balloon mission, but you can also propose a guest instrument to any existing tether balloon mission, provided that there's capacity on those missions. We're still working on how to best communicate where there's capacity, so you'll have to bear with us on that. We might have to work with you, but yes, we do accept guest instruments, and there are guidelines for what the characteristics of those guest instruments need to be, and Derry Dexheimer is our lead for that area and can help with that.
Very cool to hear. Is there a payload capacity limit?
It's specific to the mission.
Yeah, I mean, the total payload is, I want to say, on the order of 100 pounds for our main system. And I'm going to be guessing numbers, so I'm just not going to do that. But we have a baseline set of instruments that occupy a significant fraction of that. And so how much is left for additional guest instruments is going to vary. In some cases, it'd be fully occupied, but sometimes there will be remaining capacity.
And I did put a link in the chat for TBS information that's linked off of our campaign site that could be useful for that as well.
Thanks, appreciate that.
A chat question on, have you used the tethered balloon system on ships? ARM has not deployed the TBS on a ship at this point. We believe it's possible, and we have pondered the idea and are looking at possibly doing something related to EPCAPE in that area, but we are in the analysis section of determining if, when, and what would be available for doing that. So it's not something we say we definitely would put out there for doing, but it's not something we're saying no to either at this point. I would suggest not making that critical to your entire proposal, though.
I mean, our Derry is confident that she could make that work. One comment would be a tether balloon system. So the ship, not surprisingly, adds considerable cost to the tether balloon deployment. So a tether balloon system by itself on a ship really changes the flavor of that deployment. If we're talking about a mobile facility deployment with a tether balloon, the fractional additional cost is, I mean, it's already, with the ship's already there. So I think that'd be a very different situation. Obviously, there are significant constraints on obstructions, et cetera, that have to be dealt with, but it's definitely something we're interested in pursuing. Just a couple minutes here. Any final questions? Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming, and I really appreciated the questions and engagement. And as Nikki said, please go out and check out the campaign page, and look forward to seeing some great proposals. Thank you, Michelle, and would be interested in your feedback on how this went. Anything, suggestions you have for future for webinars, or any questions you might have. that didn't get answered here.
Yeah, there's a link in a chat to the survey. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
I